August 21st, 2025. Cranes groaned against the Mediterranean sky while divers surfaced in Abu Qir Bay, shouting in celebration. What emerged from the water that day wasn't supposed to exist anymore, not intact, not after 2,000 years beneath the waves. A massive quartz sphinx bearing the cartouches of Ramses II broke the surface, water streaming from stone that hadn't seen sunlight since Rome was an empire. This wasn't just another archaeological find. This was Canopus speaking from the depths. For 25 years, nothing had surfaced from the sunken city. A quarter century of silence while the ruins sat undisturbed in the silt and darkness. Then, in one 3-day period, everything changed. The head of a marble statue of Serapis, 4 to 5 meters tall, rose from the seafloor. An almost intact black granite statue of a Ptolemaic queen followed. White marble depicting a Roman nobleman, limestone buildings that might have been temples, a dock, reservoirs designed for water and fish cultivation, all of it preserved in conditions that shouldn't have protected anything this well for this long. The Egyptian Minister of Tourism and Antiquities stood watching. So did the governor of Alexandria, the commander of the navy, foreign diplomats, ambassadors. They weren't there for a routine recovery operation. They were witnessing something that fundamentally shifts what we thought we knew about how civilizations disappear. Because Canopus didn't just sink. It vanished so completely that for centuries historians debated whether it had ever existed at all. You've probably never heard of Canopus, and that's exactly the problem. Before Alexandria rose to dominate the Egyptian coast, before Rome turned the Mediterranean into its personal lake, Canopus was the primary port for Greek trade in Egypt. Not a minor settlement, not a fishing village. The principal gateway between two worlds, positioned at the mouth of the westernmost branch of the Nile Delta, controlling commerce, culture, and religious practice for hundreds of years. Herodotus called it an ancient port, and he was writing in the 5th century BC, meaning Canopus was already old when classical Greece was young. Homeric legend claims Menelaus himself founded the city, naming it after his ship's pilot who died there from a serpent bite. Whether that's myth or memory doesn't matter as much as what it tells us. Canopus existed in the Greek imagination as a place of mythic importance, a location where gods and mortals intersected. During the Ptolemaic dynasty, which ruled Egypt for nearly 3 centuries, Canopus became something else entirely. A pilgrimage site. Thousands travelled there annually to participate in the mysteries of Osiris, religious festivals reenacting the god's death, dismemberment, and resurrection. The ceremonies were so central to Egyptian spiritual life that official decrees referenced them specifically. One stone tablet describes how an effigy of Osiris was transported by ceremonial barge from the neighbouring city of Heraklion to Canopus each year on the 29th of the month of Choak. Think about what that means. An entire city built around ritual, around the movement of sacred objects through water, around temples designed for mysteries we can barely reconstruct from fragmentary texts. Canopus wasn't just commercially important, it was spiritually essential. Then Rome absorbed Egypt, and Canopus transformed again. Roman writers described it with a mixture of fascination and disgust. Seneca mentioned its luxury and vice. Juvenal referenced its debauchery. The city became notorious for excess, a place where wealthy Romans went to indulge appetites they couldn't satisfy in more respectable locations. Temples to Osiris and Serapis still operated, but now they coexisted with Roman bathhouses, forums, and the architecture of imperial administration. For roughly 6 centuries, Canopus thrived under Roman and later Byzantine control. Coins from Egyptian, Ptolemaic, Roman, Byzantine, and even Islamic periods have been recovered from the site, proof of continuous occupation spanning more than a millennium. The city adapted, evolved, absorbed new influences while maintaining its core identity as a place where water, commerce, and the sacred intersected. And then it sank. Not suddenly, not in a single catastrophic event, though earthquakes and tsunamis certainly played their role. The eastern suburbs of Canopus succumbed to liquefaction, the soil literally turning to liquid beneath the weight of stone buildings. Rising sea levels claimed more territory, shifting geology redrew the coastline. By the 8th century AD, much of Canopus existed only as memory. Its streets and temples submerged beneath Abu Qir Bay, its western suburbs buried under what would become the modern Egyptian town of Abu Qir. For over 1,000 years, Canopus stayed hidden. Maps forgot where it had been. Historians debated whether ancient descriptions were exaggerated or entirely fictional. The physical city, the actual stones and statues and temples, rested under meters of water and silt, perfectly preserved by lack of oxygen, invisible to everyone except occasional fishermen who pulled up carved blocks in their nets and wondered what they'd found. In 1933, an RAF commander flying over Abu Qir Bay noticed something unusual in the water below. Shapes, patterns, structures that looked too regular to be natural. He reported what he'd seen to Egyptian scholar Prince Omar Tosun, who began preliminary investigations. But the technology didn't exist yet to properly explore what lay beneath the waves. The discovery remained tantalizingly incomplete, a hint of something vast waiting in the darkness. 63 years would pass before anyone returned with the tools to actually see what was down there. And what they found would force us to completely reconsider what we thought we knew about how cities die and what they leave behind. In 1996, French underwater archaeologist Frank Goddio arrived in Abu Qir Bay with something previous expeditions had lacked: technology that could actually see through murky water and thick sediment, advanced sonar, magnetometry capable of detecting metal and dense stone beneath layers of silt, equipment that could map the sea floor with the precision of a surveyor charting dry land. What his team found wasn't just ruins. It was an entire cityscape, frozen in time, waiting in the darkness. The sonar revealed ghostly outlines first. Temple foundations, massive stone blocks arranged in patterns too deliberate to be natural. Collapsed columns still indicating where grand structures once stood. And statues. So many statues, some still upright on the seafloor as if their worshippers had simply walked away and never returned. When divers went down to investigate what the sonar had mapped, they found preservation that shouldn't have been possible. Bronze deities with features still sharp after centuries underwater. Stelae carved with hieroglyphs, the inscriptions perfectly legible. Ritual vessels that looked like they'd been placed on temple altars yesterday, not over 1,000 years ago. The lack of oxygen in the waterlogged sediment had created a tomb more effective than any desert burial. But here's what changed everything. Among the discoveries was a massive 3-metre-wide, 103-metre-long masonry wall, the foundation of a major building, almost certainly the Temple of Serapis, the god whose worship defined Canopus for centuries. They also found something else: a canal, not natural, engineered. The remains of an ancient waterway that once linked Canopus directly to its sister city Heracleion, 7 kilometres away. And inside that canal, offerings. Small votive statues, tossed into the water by pilgrims seeking favour from the gods. Thousands of them scattered along the canal bed like breadcrumbs marking a sacred path. Then came the ceremonial barge, nearly complete, constructed from sycamore wood, which shouldn't have survived. Sycamore was the wood associated with Osiris, used specifically for objects related to his worship. This wasn't a fishing boat or merchant vessel. This was the sacred barge described in ancient texts, the one that carried the effigy of Osiris from Heracleion to Canopus every year on the 29th of Choak. You're looking at physical confirmation of religious practices we only knew from fragmentary stone tablets. The ceremonies weren't myths or exaggerations. They happened, right here, using this boat, in this canal. And that's just the beginning of what they uncovered. The surveys revealed a complete Roman-era city beneath the waves. Not scattered ruins, a functioning urban centre. Temples, yes, but also cisterns for water storage. Quays where ships once docked. Fish tanks for aquaculture. An ancient harbour stretching 125 metres, its structure still identifiable despite centuries of submersion. Amphorae appeared with seals still stamped on them, markers of where they came from and what they contained. Coins from multiple eras turned up in the sediment: Egyptian, Ptolemaic, Roman, Byzantine. Even Islamic period coins proving occupation continued long after Rome fell, long after Christianity replaced the old gods, right up until the sea finally claimed everything. Among the statues pulled from the depths, one stands out for sheer scale. The head of a marble statue of Serapis, 4 to 5 meters tall when complete. Imagine the full figure, a god towering over worshippers visible from across the city, a declaration of Canopus's devotion carved in stone. They also recovered a nearly intact black granite statue of a Ptolemaic queen, life-sized, features still sharp. She would have stood in a temple or public square representing royal power and divine authority simultaneously, because in Ptolemaic Egypt, those weren't separate concepts. But perhaps the most mysterious find is the quartz sphinx bearing the cartouches of Ramesses II. Ramesses ruled Egypt over 1,000 years before Canopus reached its peak. How did his sphinx end up here? Was it moved during antiquity? Looted from an older site, placed deliberately to connect Canopus with Egypt's ancient past? Nobody knows yet. What they do know is that this discovery extends Canopus's footprint significantly. Recent excavations found a new complex of buildings pushing the city's mapped boundaries 1 kilometre further south. More temples, more evidence of a port, pottery fragments, gold jewellery, rings and earrings in Ptolemaic style. Every season brings something new, something that forces archaeologists to redraw their maps and reconsider what they thought they understood. The scale of preservation is what troubles modern researchers, because while Canopus stayed hidden for over a millennium, it won't stay that way much longer. Alexandria is sinking more than 3 millimetres each year. Rising sea levels threaten not just underwater sites, but coastal heritage still on land. According to United Nations projections, even under optimistic scenarios, 1/3 of Alexandria could be underwater or uninhabitable by 2050. The cities that sank millennia ago are now at risk from modern climate change. What survived earthquakes, tsunamis, and liquefaction might not survive the next century of rising oceans. Which raises an uncomfortable question. What happens to everything still down there? Because despite these remarkable recoveries, most of Canopus remains exactly where it sank, buried under sediment, protected by strict archaeological protocols that prevent removal except under specific circumstances. Egypt has plans, ambitious plans that would change underwater archaeology forever. They're planning the world's first underwater museum, not a collection of salvaged artifacts displayed on land, an actual museum beneath the waves where visitors descend to view Canopus in situ, preserved exactly where it fell, surrounded by the same waters that protected it for over 1,000 years. Think about what that means. Glass tunnels snaking through submerged streets, viewing platforms positioned beside temple foundations, artificial lighting illuminating statues that spent centuries in darkness, tourists floating past ceremonial boats, looking through reinforced windows at the remnants of religious processions that once drew pilgrims from across the ancient world. The concept isn't just ambitious, it's necessary. Because strict archaeological protocols prevent removing most artifacts from their resting places. Metal corrodes rapidly when exposed to air after centuries underwater. Wood that survived due to oxygen-free sediment disintegrates within hours of exposure. Even stone requires immediate conservation treatment the moment it surfaces. Moving everything would destroy more than it preserves. So Egypt is choosing a different approach. Leave the majority where it lies, build the museum around it instead. Let the site itself become the exhibit. Controlled access protects the ruins while allowing study and tourism simultaneously. It's preservation through presentation, archaeology through architecture. But there's an urgency driving this project that goes beyond scientific interest. Climate change isn't waiting for anyone to finish their excavation plans. Sea levels continue rising. Alexandria sinks millimetre by millimetre. Coastal erosion accelerates. The United Nations projections aren't theoretical anymore. They're measurable, observable, happening right now. By 2050, 1/3 of Alexandria faces submersion or abandonment. Not the ancient city already underwater, the modern city built above it. Millions of people living on land that might not remain habitable much longer. Infrastructure designed for conditions that no longer exist. A metropolitan area racing against geological and climatic forces it can't control, which creates a strange paradox. The ancient sites survived because they sank before modern pollution, before industrial fishing, before the Mediterranean became as heavily trafficked as it is today. They stayed hidden, protected by sediment and depth and simple neglect. But now that we've found them, now that we understand their value, rising seas threaten to damage what earthquakes and tsunamis couldn't destroy. Increased water movement erodes delicate surfaces. Changing temperatures affect chemical preservation. More maritime traffic means more anchor damage, more pollution, more disturbance to sites that remained stable for centuries. Canopus survived its collapse. It might not survive its rediscovery. That's why the targeted excavations matter so much. Frank Goddio and his team from the European Institute for Underwater Archaeology aren't rushing to uncover everything at once. They're documenting methodically, removing only what requires immediate conservation, mapping the rest for future study when technology improves and conditions stabilize. Every artifact they raise comes with detailed positioning data. Photogrammetry captures three-dimensional records before anything moves. Sediment samples get analysed. Wood fragments undergo dendrochronology. Coins and pottery shards provide dating evidence. The goal isn't just recovery, it's understanding context, reconstructing how the city functioned, who lived there, how they worshipped, what they traded, where their wealth originated. And there's more coming. Much more. One announcement already scheduled concerns a merchant shipwreck discovered loaded with trade goods. Mediterranean commerce in physical form, cargo still packed exactly as it was the day the vessel went down. Shipbuilding techniques visible in preserved hull timbers. Economic patterns revealed through amphora contents and origin stamps. The vessel itself becomes a time capsule of ancient maritime activity. 86 artifacts currently sit in the Secrets of the Sunken City exhibition at Alexandria's National Museum. The display runs for 6 months, giving visitors their first look at objects that spent over a millennium underwater. That quartz sphinx, the marble Roman nobleman, Ptolemaic jewellery, Byzantine coins, physical proof of everything the historical records claimed about Canopus but could never quite confirm. Seeing them changes something. Reading about lost cities feels abstract, almost mythological. But standing before a statue that once received prayers, that witnessed ceremonies, that occupied space in a functioning temple before earthquakes brought everything down, that makes it real in ways descriptions never can. This is what archaeologists mean when they talk about material culture. Objects aren't just decorative. They're evidence. Each statue represents religious priorities. Every coin proves economic systems. Pottery styles indicate trade networks. Building foundations reveal urban planning. Taken together, they reconstruct societies that left no written records explaining themselves, or whose records burned, flooded, crumbled away. Canopus speaks through its ruins, through the alignment of its streets and the scale of its harbour. Through temple layouts that mirror cosmic beliefs and residential quarters that show how ordinary people actually lived. Through workshops where craftsmen produced goods and marketplaces where those goods changed hands. The water preserved what air would have destroyed, sheltered what looters would have stolen, protected what time would have erased. And now, briefly, we have a window, a chance to study, document, understand before climate change closes that window forever, before rising seas and coastal erosion threaten both the ancient city beneath the waves and the modern city standing above them. That's the real race happening in Abu Qir Bay. Not just against time, but against the same forces that sank Canopus originally. Earthquakes still shake the region. Sea levels still rise. The Mediterranean still reshapes Egypt's coastline. History doesn't stop repeating just because we've started paying attention. The question is whether we learn from what happened before it happens again. Standing in that museum, looking at artifacts still damp from their emergence, you realise something unsettling. We're not just studying how cities die, We're watching it happen in real time. The same bay that swallowed Canopus 2,000 years ago is rising again, threatening to claim what remains. Every statue recovered, every temple foundation mapped, every ceremonial canal documented. It's all racing against geology that doesn't care about preservation timelines or exhibition schedules. Canopus waited over a millennium to tell its story. Now that story has maybe 3 decades before the conditions that protected it start accelerating its decay. The Underwater Museum isn't just an archaeological innovation, it's a gamble that we can build fast enough, protect thoroughly enough, and adapt quickly enough to save what earthquakes couldn't destroy and time couldn't erase. Because if we lose this, we lose more than ruins. We lose proof that civilizations far more sophisticated than we give them credit for simply vanished, leaving only whispers in ancient texts and shapes in the water that took 1,000 years for anyone to recognize as what they actually were. The statues are surfacing. The temples are mapped. The question now is whether we're learning what Canopus has to teach us before the Mediterranean reclaims its secrets permanently.